So now that we have a general idea on how the database library works, we're going to create our first model. So in your application models folder, let's just right click and add a new PHP file and call it user underscore model. Now this has to have the underscore model. That's how CodeIgniter knows it's a model and it won't conflict with, say, a user controller, which doesn't have a suffix. So finish. And this is pretty easy to do. It's just almost identical to the controller. We just extend the CI model. Okay. If I haven't said it yet, CI just stands for CodeIgniter. It's pretty obvious, but sometimes you miss little things. So what we're going to do is create a model, and later on we're going to refactor some of our code, and you'll see why I want to show you how to do it this way so that you understand how to just make a basic model and how later we can maybe improve and refactor things. So while you write this, it'd be good to type it out and make the design mistakes that we're making so that later you can see how we're going to improve them. Okay, so first thing is we want to be able to get user data. So we'll make a function for getting. I'll just call it get. And we're going to have 4 functions total. So I'll highlight these, and I'm going to highlight the line right above it so that I have a space when I duplicate the lines. And I'll hold Control and Shift and press down about 3 times. And we want methods for get, insert, update, and delete. And we're going to want this to be accessible so we can test it on our site. And the only way to do that is to make a controller. So for now we're just going to create a user controller. We can go ahead and copy all of this and new PHP file for the controller and just call it user. Okay. And we change the extend to CI controller, and we have to change the class name to user so it matches the file name. So make sure you double check those. Class is user and we're extending the controller now. So that we don't get these two confused, I don't think we will, because you see the file name is user and then user model. Okay, we'll leave it at that for now. So in the model we're going to use the database. So I'll say this db get, and we're always getting from a table, so we'll say get from user. And we're going to need to make this a query. So the way I like to develop classes is I like to see how I'm going to use them publicly before I develop the internals. So the way I like to think about this is, from the user controller, I want to be able to type, this is just some sample code below, this user model get 2. So that would get the user ID with 2. Okay. So we could use a get where or a get all, because we also want the option to get all users or get a single user, so that it's flexible. In this case, really all I want is to be able to get by the user ID. Keep it simple. So I'm going to pass a parameter called user ID, and by default it'll just be null. Then we'll say if user ID is null, then we're going to get all users. Okay. In the queue there, my queue variable, if you choose to, you could call it query. I know it's good to have descriptive variables, but in this case it's blatantly obvious what queue means if you're familiar with databases. Else, we'll say this db where, and we'll say inside of an array user ID is equal to the user ID which they pass in right here. And if we look at our example code, how we want to use this, on our end, we would actually type this right here. I'll put this above the method. So the way we type it is this user model get, whoops, 2. Okay, and if we just passed in get, it would get them all. So let's go ahead and make a comment on that, and I'll just put usage. So this one would be a single record, this one would be all records. Okay, this is called a PHP doc. I think you're probably familiar with this. Always good to document your code. Since we're going to be refactoring this though later on, I'm not going to get too nitpicky about the documents. And for this, let's see, we're always going to get the user, so let's see, get user, okay, and then we do the return here. So we could do a get where, actually. That'll make it easier, like that. We should actually flip these around because this should be above the get statement, maybe. No, this would be Q equals get where. Okay, so the query is get all users. This query is get where the user ID equals user ID. And we'll say return Q result, and that is a function. Now this will return an object by default. I'm going to return an array because I think arrays are a little easier to work with. So we'll go ahead and test this out. So we've looked at the code. Just make sure that your code looks similar to this, well, identical preferably. And back to the user controller, just here, we're actually going to test it out. Now, first things first, the user controller is always going to use the user model, okay? So I'm just going to load that when this class is created. So I'll say public function construct. Well, it threw in the parent construct for me, which is nice, because you have to have that in order to do this. And I'll say this load model user model. Okay, now we have the user model accessible to this entire class because we loaded the construct. So from the get, I could say this user model get, and I'll say, how about 3? You're going to want to open your database client and make sure you have a record that you're going to test getting. So I have my Heidi SQL open and I have some sample records, and you see I have an ID of 2. You're going to want to make sure you have one there. So let me open this page, and we're going to go to user/get, and it says table junior-3 does not exist. It looks like I forgot to pass in a table name parameter, and I'm glad this error showed because sometimes typing too fast you can forget this stuff. It looks like this right here. I forgot to pass in user right there. So we always have to define the table name in the get and get where. So I'll refresh. It looks like there's no error now, but we want to print out the results just to be sure. So I could say data equals the result. And we're not going to work with views right now. We're just testing our model. So like this, refresh. And we get an empty array, and that doesn't seem correct because the user ID 3 and the user, that is correct. I stand corrected. I'll do ID 5. I guess that's what happens preparing your code and messing around. So I'll refresh with 5 and I have a record. Cool. So get works nice. Now with insert, the way I want to be able to type this out will be pretty similar. I'll say this user model insert, and all I want to do is pass in an array, and I'll do a login name, and I'll call him Jethro from the Beverly Hillbillies, and I'll just print R of the result. Okay, now we still have to make our model functionality. But let's go ahead and fill out just how we want it to work here. So for the update, I'll want result equals this user model update. And what do I want to update? I'll just say login equals Peggy. And the second parameter would be the user ID. Okay? And I'll print R the result. And by the way, when I'm editing, I usually use Shift Tab to untab things instead of hitting backspace. Tab and Shift Tab, that'll help you. And let's do one for delete. I just want to say result equals this user model delete and the ID. Okay? So we have our basic functionality and how we want them to work. First, I'm going to copy this guy and go to my user model. And for inserting, I'll make a little comment block. And this is just going to be another usage thing so that we have note of it. Since we're kind of new to it, we want to remember how we did it. So here will be data. You'd probably want to do a param array data. This is a real PHP dot comment. So I'll say this db insert into user data. And whenever you insert data, it's always a really good idea to get back the insert ID. And to get that, we'll say return this db insert ID. Okay. So we'll test out our insert and go to our page and type in insert. And we got 9. I'll refresh the page, 10, 11, 12. So it keeps inserting and it keeps returning our primary key here. Good, that's what we want. Okay, so on to the update. Update requires a where statement. So we're always going to pass in data that needs to be updated. And let's pass in the user ID we want to update. So the first thing is this db update, and the table is user and the data is data, and then we want to supply the user ID in a where statement. So I'll say this db where user ID is user ID. Now, one thing to watch out for, which I make a mistake of often, is whenever I type in these where statements with arrays, sometimes I accidentally put a comma here, and then this causes a whole bunch of problems because there's no key value pair to match up to, and it's a little hard to tell what you did wrong. So that's one thing to watch out for. And for this one, for updates, we want to turn how many rows were affected. So I'll say return this db affected rows. Okay. And let's go ahead and try our update. Let's make sure we have a matching user ID. So we have ID of 3. Let's see if we have that ID. We don't. So I'll just change this one to 3. Where it says hey 2. Make sure you do that in your database. So whatever ID you're going to edit, we're going to see a change value. So I'll go and type update. And I got 1 row affected. And I'll hit refresh and it says Peggy. Now if we hit refresh again, 0 means nothing was really changed. So don't take that as an error, take it more like nothing changed. Okay. And now for our delete function, I want to delete by user ID, and this one's pretty easy. This db delete the user table, and we'll do our user ID and the little arrow, user ID. Okay, and we also want to return the affected rows. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly make a comment here. Oops, it auto inserted all this stuff. I'm not going to worry about this all too much right now because we'll refactor stuff later. I just want to grab the usage for it. So we have, this is how we delete. And I'll just paste it in here. The reason I like to do this is because later I'll think about it, and sometimes there's a better way to do it. Actually, almost every time there is. And the update and usage. Okay. And let's try the delete. I first want to check what the ID was, so 6. And in my database, do I have a 6? Right here. So I'll go ahead and hit enter. And let's see, is 6 still there? It deleted it. It looks like I forgot to return a value. Got a little too excited. Okay, I am returning a value from the model. Notice we're in the model here. So in the controller, I just want to print R of the result. So I'll delete number 7. And refresh, and it's a 1. So 7 is now erased. And just so you know, I'm pressing F5 in my browser and in this Heidi SQL to refresh stuff. Okay. So what we can do is actually make this user area a little more flexible. Obviously, we're probably not going to have these exact commands available in the URL because that's dangerous. But you know, just to try it out, we could pass in a user ID in here and then send it to the model. So if I were to do delete and then let's see, 11, like this, that calls the model through the controller and gives us the result back. So it deleted 11. Now a lot of this might look confusing, but this was mostly just to test it, okay? To make sure our user model is functioning correctly. So try not to get confused. The controller here, which has the same things as the user model here, okay? What I'm going to do just for the heck of it is put test get, test insert, test update, and test delete. I should have done that at first, but as I look at this, I think it'll easily confuse people. So that'll sum it up, and congratulations on making your first model. Pretty cool to actually get something working. And that'll sum up this video.